I mean, Australia calls this region its immediate neighborhood, and yet there is a lack of presence in the immediate neighborhood.
You're listening to the USSC Briefing Room, a podcast from the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney, where we give you a seat at the table for a USSC briefing on the latest developments in US news and foreign policy. We'll cover what you need to know and what's beneath the surface of the news.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Briefing Room. My name is Jared Monshine. I'm Director of Research at the United States Study Center, and I am recording on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Today I am joined by a Maitree Research Fellow by the name of Riya Sinha, and we are so glad to be catching her in her last few days in country. Riya is not only a fantastic researcher, or has been a fantastic researcher at the U.S. Study Center, but she originally is, and normally is not based in Australia, but actually recently joined us for a few months. That we'll talk about that shortly. But at home, her home in India, she works on really fascinating topics that we're going to discuss shortly. For now, when she is about to leave Australia, she will be going back to the Center for Social and Economic Progress in Delhi. So, Riya, I am so appreciative of your time with us, and I am so grateful. But maybe if we could hear a little bit about what brought you to Australia in the first place.
Thank you, Jared. Very happy to do the second podcast at USSC. This has been a fantastic home institution, a fantastic host institution for the last 6 months that I've spent there. And I'm just very grateful for this opportunity. So what led me to this and what I've been doing here for the last 6 months? So I have come to Australia as a Maitree Fellow. This is a fellowship run by the Centre for Australia-India Relations, sponsored by them, which is a new body created last year by DFAT to strengthen the ongoing bilateral between Australia and India, of which we've seen in the last few months how, in terms of the number of exchanges, how that's increased. So the whole idea, it was that to bring Indian scholars to Australia. There's 7 of us Maitree Fellows here. I'm one of them, across different institutions. Basically, to have bilateral exchange of policy knowledge of India in Australia and Australia in India, because I think there was an understanding that beyond the ministerial level policy exchanges that take place, there is also a need for policy scholars, different sections of the society. Maitree is not just about policy scholars. There's cultural partnerships, business partnerships, so different parts of the society to come together and strengthen this bilateral relationship. And my contribution is towards the policy engagement part of it. And these 6 months have been absolutely fantastic. We do talk about Australia and India, but not to the depth that I have learned over here. And therefore, I'll be taking a lot back and talking a lot more about Australia and India as well.
Great. And now, when you do go back, you are going back to your job in working at a think tank in Delhi. Could you maybe give us an idea of what you work on back home?
So in Delhi, I'm a researcher at the Center for Social and Economic Progress. It is a not-for-profit think tank based in New Delhi. It's an independent think tank. I'm part of the Foreign Policy and Security Studies vertical, where I've been researching for the last 5 years. I focus on India's relations with its neighboring countries in the Indian Ocean region, particularly in the space of infrastructure development, but also political relations, development cooperation. I coordinate this initiative called Sambandh Regional Connectivity Initiative, which really focuses on using data to map India's relations with the neighboring countries. Ever since I've been working in for many years, many researchers have pointed out that India is not connected enough with its own neighborhood. But we wanted to check what does it mean in practice. So the initiative involves a range of indicators from political, economic, defense, environment and cultural and we look at data of the Indian government as well as that published by multilateral institutions to map how well or not well connected we are with India is connected with the neighboring countries.
And before I hear about how you got into this space, I'd love to hear how well is India connected, or is it increasing, or is it a mixed picture?
It's increasing, I would say. It's increasing. Regional trade is still, the intra-regional trade is still at 5%, although India's trade with the neighboring countries has doubled in the last few years, but it still remains a small portion of India's global trade. And a lot of, and we identify in this initiative a lot of challenges. A lot of our publications are focused on how to overcome these policy recommendations to overcome these challenges. But in the last 10 years, I would say a lot of connectivity initiatives have taken place. And I can, there's so many now that I can't, 10 years ago, I could list them on my fingers. Today, I cannot, because they're just increasing every day. And it's showing in the way that despite political changes in the region, India has maintained good relations with the neighboring countries. It is a new approach to how India engages with the neighboring country, which is centered on connectivity. And it's also a demand by the countries in the region.
Just for context, you said there's 5% of trade is intra-regional?
Intra-regional, yes.
How does that compare to other regions, by chance, if you know?
22%, and there was a World Bank report that that gave all of the 22% in sub-Saharan Africa, more than about 40 to 50% in the ASEAN region, and and a bit more than that in the European Union. So
long way to go for.
We're looking at 5% in South Asia.
Okay, now you clearly have an impressive track record on publications under your belt, but how did you even get into this space? I can't say I've ever met another expert in your area of expertise.
Two ways. One, when I was doing my master's back in India, master's in international relations, one of my, an internship was a compulsory part of the course, and I interned at this institution called FICCI, with the South Asia desk. At that point...
What does FICCI stand for?
FICCI, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So I was placed with the South Asia desk. I had no idea about connectivity, regional integration, but my supervisor there, I do remember he would sit with me every day and tell me, what does regional connectivity mean? Why is it important for every day? Why is it important for businesses? So that was the key takeaway, and that did form a part of my master's thesis as well. Regional connectivity, the political economy of regional connectivity in South Asia. Once I graduated, the first job I got was on South Asian connectivity, but my knowledge was more theoretical and less practical. And in the first 15 days of my first job, I was sent to the first port, the first border area, to study it. It was very difficult, but I fell in love with ports at that point.
And what job was this?
So I was I was in a policy consultancy called Bureau of Research for Industry and Economic Fundamentals. And they work on infrastructure and connectivity, India's plus those with the neighboring countries. So border infrastructure, seaport infrastructure. So I was sent to my first land border, which was at Petropol within 15 days of joining. And then within a month, I was sent to the first seaport in India, which was at the Jawaharlal Nehru port in Nhava Sheva port in Mumbai. And just to look at the procedures, just to understand the procedure, understand how it impacts a common person sitting far away from the port was a very revealing process for me. And I just fell in love with the subject, and I wanted to study more, contribute more, because I could see even smaller changes could make a big contribution to India's economy.
That's a perfect segue to understanding what you've worked on while you've been here for the last half year. You've continued your research in this area, but with a particular focus on Australian opportunities to get in this space. Could you maybe give us an understanding of what you've been working on while you're here?
So the research project that I pursued here, that's an extension of the work that I do back in Delhi on regional connectivity. So like I said, India's connectivity initiatives have increased in the last 10 years with the neighboring countries. And when we are in policy discussions, one of the questions that we're usually asked in the policy circles is, how are other countries doing it? How are other countries engaging with their neighboring countries? Or how are other countries increasing their capabilities and capacities? And how can India work with these countries in its neighborhood, in the Indian Ocean region? So that's a big part of the puzzle that I feel over here in terms of trying to get Australia in the Indian Ocean region and see beyond defense, what kind of engagements can Australia do? Port development, I identified as one of the areas, not just because I've been working on ports for the last decade or so, but also because port development is a scalable opportunity. It does not always involve going with billions and building a port. There are process improvements, there's trade facilitation, there is capacity building and training, there is digitization processes, which are smaller interventions, but they do make a big difference on the cost of doing trade in the developing countries, which is a need in the Indian Ocean, region. US has filled this gap. US is present in the region filling this gap. Japan is building ports in the region, but Australia is pretty much absent in these conversations. We don't think of, at least when we talk about infrastructure and connectivity in the Indian Ocean region, New Delhi, Australia is not a country that comes to mind. So I also wanted to study what are the capabilities that Australia has and how Australia can be more present in the region beyond the defense space.
Why do you think it's important for Australia to be present in the region? One thing I've seen is, you've said the Chinese presence in these areas is pretty significant. What should Australia be thinking about, or what is Australia thinking about that, and how, in terms of the sort of geopolitics that infuses this area, how has that changed the India's approach to port infrastructure?
So first on Australia's engagement and why Australia should be present in the region, I think that was back in Delhi. Of course, I read the foreign policy paper, the defense update documents, and all of them identify the Indian Ocean region and the Northeast Indian Ocean region as part of Australia's immediate neighborhood. Western Australia is often referred to as Australia's Indian Ocean capital, and yet there was a presence that's lacking. There have been ministerial visits to Bangladesh earlier this year. The Foreign Minister Penny Wong, she was in Bangladesh earlier this year. Sri Lanka, Australia has been engaging with Sri Lanka and Maldives at different levels. They opened a consulate a mission in Maldives last year. So with all of these engagements, the idea was how to strengthen Australia's presence in the region. Australia is interested, that's clear. But where can Australia strengthen its presence? Where can Australia be more visible in the region? I mean, Australia calls this region its immediate neighborhood. And yet there is a lack of presence in the immediate neighborhood. Of course, I understand the Pacific might be more important, and the level of strategic interest and capacity to be present is very different compared to the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. But it's also to do that, how can Australia be, with the existing resources, how can Australia be more present in something that is its immediate strategic neighborhood? Australia's trade passes through the Indian Ocean region. Australia has, all of Australia, it's a matter of economic vulnerability for Australia as well.
What is the downside to China just building all the ports for India? Is India receptive to Chinese? Not in India, but across the Indian Ocean. But is India open to China, doing ports across the Indian Ocean?
Not really. India does see that as a matter of concern, and because if we just put it on a map, then all of India's neighboring countries have a Chinese port. The whole string of pearls strategy, for example, India is deeply concerned about that. India is deeply concerned about the impact that it has in its own neighborhood's economy, because for India there's an important understanding that India's own growth story is linked to that of its neighboring countries. So Sri Lanka.
Could I ask just what's the string of pearls?
String of Pearls is a chain of is a Chinese strategy. It was developed by some analysts. It's a Chinese strategy to link ports in the Indian Ocean region. And when we look at it on the map, it surrounds India. So, India also, some analysts came up with this counter strategy for India called Necklace of Diamonds, where India builds its own ports in these neighboring countries. Because if we look at the map currently, whether it's in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India is surrounded by China-built ports in the region. And Chinese ports have also led to visits of surveillance vessels also in the region, which India does see as a threat. They have visited Sri Lanka. It's visited Pakistan. So Bangladesh as well recently, even the research vessels, for example, and India does see that as a matter of concern. India is trying to counter this by increasing connectivity linkages with the neighboring countries. India is trying to strengthen its own relations with the neighboring countries. India is trying to build ports and terminals in the neighboring countries, although not to the scale that China has, for example, in the region. Given the resources that China brings, it's very difficult for India to match this dollar to dollar. So India is also now much more open to engaging with like-minded partners in the region. And that's where specifically the Quad partners, US, Japan, Australia, they do come in and fill some of these gaps.
Yeah. So I guess India is very supportive of Australia playing more of a role in port development in the region. Is this a new sort of relationship for Australia and India to be working in tandem or in support of each other like this, not only in port infrastructure, but more broadly?
So Australia-India engagements have increased in the last few years. They were not, the bilateral was not as strong as it is today, because just as I have been here, just this year there'll be 2 visits by the Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar to Australia. India and Australia have a comprehensive strategic partnership. In 2022, they signed an economic comprehensive treaty agreement, which is now being upgraded. There's an annual leaders meeting. There is a 2+2 ministerial meeting. The commerce minister was here earlier in September. The education minister was here a few weeks back. There'll be the Raisina dialogue where India's foreign minister will be visiting Australia again. So these exchanges are taking place at a very large scale in the last few years, which is not, if you would talk about the exchanges 10 years ago, that would pretty much be absent. So this Australia-India bilateral relation is something that is growing because of the Indo-Pacific construct, because of strategic alignment in the Indian Ocean region. Because there are convergences on how Australia and India's foreign policy, especially in the Indian Ocean region, where both focus on free and open Indo-Pacific, both emphasize on maritime security. So these convergences do exist.
What do you attribute that alignment to more than anything else?
That alignment has and that's my own assessment. Different countries have different things. One is that the countries have started realizing the importance of India in the Indian Ocean region, and also to counter the increasing Chinese threat in the region. Not everyone can be present everywhere at all times. You need a strong regional partner to that, and India is being looked. And even if you read Australia's the foreign policy documents or the defense update, it does see India as an important strategic partner in the Indian Ocean region to overcome the Chinese threats that have emerged in the region.
Now, it seems like there's just limitless tailwinds for this Australia and Indian relationship, but you've been here now for 6 months. Where do you see the perceptions of each other? Do you see them as accurate? Do you see them as underdeveloped? How do you think how do you rate the Australian perceptions of India and vice versa?
I think there's still a long way to go in completely understanding completely understanding for both countries of each other, if I'm phrasing that right. because I do see that there is a lack of India knowledge over here about how India engages with the region, what are India's strategic priorities, because even though there are convergences on certain issues, there are also divergences on other issues on how Australia and India see these issues. But there's a lot more there's a lot more knowledge exchange I feel that needs to happen that's still not happening. Not just at the policy level, but also at the university level. For example, there are hardly any India courses that are offered over here, for example, that at least I have come across in my 6 months here. So, and similarly in India, I don't think we have enough understanding of Australian policy, of Australian strategy, of Australian foreign policy. And I think that's a huge knowledge gap that needs to be bridged. It's great that the bilaterals are happening. It's great that all of these ministerial level exchanges are happening, but it has to percolate down to different parts of the society. And it's growing, the diaspora. I've seen a lot of diaspora engagement in the last 6 months that I've been here.
I mean, when Modi was here, he basically had like a rock stars type reception out west in Parramatta. Do you think that's unique to Modi, or do you think that whoever follows Modi will get that sort of reception as well?
Unique to Modi over here?
Yeah, in terms of that level of popularity. Do you view that as this unique to him as a politician, and he inspires that sort of adulation, or do you think that any sort of Indian leader coming out to Australia will get that sort of reception moving forward?
See, one thing that Prime Minister Modi has done in his term since 2014 is to mobilize the Indian diaspora everywhere. So whether it's in Australia, whether it's in the US, you see Indian diaspora engaged a lot more with the policy discourse now than it ever was earlier. And this is something that the Modi government has very much focused on since 2014, on how can they use the diaspora for their own foreign policy objectives. So in terms of Australia-India relations, one of the 10 years ago, it was a relationship based on 3 C's, cricket, curry, and Commonwealth. That has changed to 3 D's, democracy, dosti, which is friendship, and diaspora.
Oh, that's great. I never heard that. So I guess now that we have an understanding of your area of expertise, as well as the broader Australian-Indian areas of cooperation, can I ask then the sort of geopolitical question about the Quad itself, which is one of the primary vehicles for that sort of allies and partners type of approach that India and the other Quad members are increasingly relying on. Where do you see, especially after your time here, where do you see the Quad moving from here? And you've talked about more exchanges and from the bilateral perspective, more people links and more academic study. But what's sort of the pathway forward that you recommend for the Quad?
For the Quad, I think it's very important for the countries to learn how to coordinate efforts and not overlap their efforts. It's a grouping based on delivery of public goods. There are a lot of debates about the security aspect in the Quad. Should Quad focus on security or not? Different and that is where the 4 countries also diverge in their approach to the Quad, because for India does not look at Quad as a security grouping at all, or something that can potentially be a security grouping. Different reasons for that. Also because for India, its immediate strategic priority is the first circle, which is its own neighborhood, and any country going there with a security objective or with a security approach in mind is not going to be welcome in terms of the developmental opportunities that exist. And India doesn't want to miss those opportunities in the countries. But for Quad, going forward, there needs to be a lot more coordination. I did see some clarity on that in terms of different sectors in the recent statement, in the recent Leaders Summit statement, in terms of India taking a lead in certain areas, or whether it was the Cancer Moonshot and what exactly would be the role of the 4 countries. So I think a lot more of that happens because Quad really needs to focus on delivery and implementations of its mechanisms if it wants to be seen as an effective grouping.
In terms of low-hanging fruit for that delivery, what areas do you think that are most ripe for Quad coordination and delivery?
Health and infrastructure. I think that's a need. That's a need of the developing countries. That's something that Quad countries have different levels of expertise in, different levels of resources in, and definitely. And again, these are scalable opportunities that Quad can deliver on.
Great. Now, to take you back to your report, you've published a pretty authoritative report on the Indian Ocean infrastructure or port infrastructure challenges and opportunities for Australia, and there's a considerable need for port infrastructure and improving port infrastructure. And as you said, it doesn't have to be, endless amounts of money. There are small areas that can have a pretty significant impact. What are your sort of main policy recommendations for Australia's efforts for supporting port infrastructure in the region?
So spend the last 6 months also understanding what are the areas that Australia has an expertise in the port sector. I did not come with an expectation that we will get the Australian government or the private sector to just come in the Indian Ocean and build ports. That is not something that even Australia is looking at, and Australia perhaps something cannot deliver on that front. But my focus was to identify areas where Australia can deliver, and I focus on 4 areas in my report. One is on port decarbonization measures. This is a conversation that is not happening in the Indian Ocean region currently, especially in the smaller countries. Australia has had a lot of conversations on this. Australia has developed an action plan for this. That is something that can be taken to the region. The second was on developing smart ports. Mining and logistics automation is something that Australia has expertise in, which is missing in the region. That's one area. That's one opportunity that can be leveraged. Capacity building and training. Australian Border Force does a lot of capacity building exercises, and that can be extended to the neighboring countries in coordination, in cooperation with India, and lastly, trade facilitation. Australia is one of the few countries in the world that has achieved 100% implementation of its trade facilitation agreement with the WTO, which involves simplifying procedures, customs procedures, digitization of processes, smaller interventions that lead to big changes in the whole port ecosystem. Australia can be an effective partner to strengthen trade facilitation in these countries. This was maritime logistics and trade facilitation was a part of the statement that came out of Foreign Minister Penny Wong's visit to Bangladesh earlier this year, and my report really looks at how Australia and India can work together to deliver on these 4 very specific areas. First, the biggest challenge here for India and Australia to work together, and also an opportunity, is to first engage with each other about each other's capabilities and capacities. I don't think there's enough knowledge. India does not look at Australia as a partner in automation, as a partner in trade facilitation. So I think knowledge, bridging that knowledge gap is going to be very important. Australia has a program in the region called SARIC, which is South Asia Regional Infrastructure Connectivity Program, which is under review for the next 5 years now. This is again an opportunity where Australia and India can coordinate to deliver on important multimodal connectivity projects in the region, and also finally mobilizing the Australian and Indian private sector. Australia does it to a certain extent in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia. India has its own India provides its own incentives to the private sector to go and operate in foreign countries, because ultimately the development efforts are going to be led by the private sector. And unless and until they have a safety blanket to start with, to engage in newer geographies, in newer territories, it's going to be very difficult to do anything in this region and deliver in this region. So these are some of my policy recommendations that I cover in the report.
Fantastic. What a tour de force. I'm so excited to have folks read this very impressive piece of research from you, Ria. Now, as you know from our last podcast experience, we asked folks for a stat or figure that is relevant to our discussion today. Did you happen to bring one with you?
Well, I do have a lot of stats in my report. I could perhaps quote one from there, just to talk about the gravity of the infrastructure problem in the region. The South Asia, the Bay of Bengal region needs about $6.3 trillion of climate-adjusted infrastructure investment by 2030 to maintain the current levels of growth. Without this, we do risk countries. We do risk countries having economic issues without maintaining these growth levels going forward.
And to put that number into context, 6.3 billion. Trillion. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. To put that number into context, 6.3 trillion. What's a number even comparable to that for us to understand? Like, it's hard to fathom. What's 6.3 trillion?
6.3 trillion across energy and transportation infrastructure sectors in the region. So compared to that, what we are, for example, the US has given $550 million to develop one container terminal. By comparison, Australia's SARIC initiative, which I talked about, was about 32 million Australian dollars, which is a relatively modest amount in the region, or 21 million US dollars. Other initiatives have not been more than $7 to $20 million in the region.
Go ahead. Yeah. It's fine. No, it's fine. You can go in. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is, given what exists right now and what we need, where we need to reach to bridge those infrastructure gaps, the distance is huge.
Great. Well, Ria, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. It's been an absolute delight to have you with us for the last half year, and we can't wait to hopefully see you very soon, but to also to stay in touch and to see the many great things that you're going to be coming out with in the future, because you're quite a talent and have really made a significant impact in Australian-Indian relations just in your own personal capacity. So thank you.
Thank you, Jared.
As we wrap up, I want to highlight that there are a number of other podcasts that the Study Center puts out. Not only do we have this briefing room, but we also have the CEO, Mike Green, his podcast, The Asia Chessboard, which he does with the CSIS think tank based in DC. We also have the USSC Live series, where you can hear our live events, including our Election 2024 series. Thank you